Parallel justice is working. It says, to victims of vandalism, theft, and assault,
what happened to you is wrong, and we will help you rebuild your life.
If you or somebody you know has been the victim of a crime such as theft, vandalism, or assault,
or if you're a business that would like to join the Resource Bank, or
if you want to become a volunteer,
contact the Community Justice Center
or the Burlington Police Department.
Together, we can make the world a safer, happier community.
I'm Emily Anderson. In this show, I present the Awareness Theater Company. We're produced by the SA Arts of Vermont. This show is sponsored by Oh, it's time for
The Interview.
Here I am now with Karen Vestine, who is the coordinator for the Community Justice Center. And you have all just seen the story, A Car Owner's Lament, which details the destruction of my car, but also highlights this program called Parallel Justice. And so I've asked Karen to come and talk more about the concept of parallel justice and also how it's practiced here in Burlington. So delighted to have you here, Karen.
Well, thank you for having me here, Emily.
So parallel justice, what does that mean? Where did this idea come from?
Well, I actually think that it might be best to illustrate what parallel justice is by talking a little bit about your experience with your car. Mm-hmm. So as the viewers probably got from the video, this was not an easy experience for you to get the help that you needed. So when you actually worked with the Community Justice Center, how would you describe how that felt?
Well, it was pretty amazing because it was just sort of in a roundabout way that they heard about what happened. I had written a letter finally to 7 Days, and Mayor Clavel saw it and sent it to the Community Justice Center. And then they called me and said, we'd like to meet with you and talk with you about what happened. And one of the first things they did was they said, look, you spent money taking care of your car. Like, not only were you a victim, but you had to pay money out of your own pocket to deal with this issue. So they said, we'd really like to find funds to reimburse you. So that was great. I mean, that little bit just made me feel a lot better.
Oh, that's great.
And then they called me. It was Kara Gleason who was at the center then. She called me and she said, we know that we'd like this to be different, and so we'd just like to interview you about your experience and what you think could be done differently. Mm-hmm. And that made me feel pretty, just the act of telling somebody what happened was really important, obviously. But also just feeling like this is going to help make a difference for somebody else meant a lot.
Right.
So.
Well, it sounds like they were very validating and supportive of your experience. Mm-hmm. And that actually is one of the best ways to describe what parallel justice is that you experienced this crime and then you were expected to pay all of the costs that were associated with getting your car towed and reclaiming your car. And let's say that it had been a different kind of crime that you needed counseling for. You might have been expected to pay for counseling. that is what we're finding is a national trend, is that victims are expected to take on these costs by themselves.
Right.
Whereas if an offender of a crime is going through the criminal justice system, then they often have available to them resources that victims just can't take advantage of. And so the reason that we are trying to create kind of a shift in our thinking about serving victims of crime is that they deserve all the same benefits and resources that offenders have. So with parallel justice, I mean, you can imagine kind of two tracks. So we're actually creating another track wherein victims get the same kinds of help that an offender would. And the ultimate goal of the program is to actually, if you were to imagine a ladder where there'd actually be rungs between the two tracks, so that you're really connecting victims to the criminal justice system, but also to their community, to services that can be really helpful to them. And I'm so appreciative of the fact that you are willing to talk about your experience, because a lot of victims feel a bit of shame after they've experienced a crime, and they often blame themselves, like, I shouldn't have parked the car there, or I shouldn't have done this, I should have locked my car, I should have locked my house. And so that's another thing that we're really working with, is that when a crime happens to you, a low-level crime or something more significant, personal, intimate violence, that kind of thing, that's never the victim's fault. And so when a victim is then expected to pay all these costs, in some ways I think victims feel like, wait, so this happened to me, but the system is telling me that I'm responsible for these things, and I think it kind of reinforces the message that this was the victim's fault to begin with. So.
Right. Yeah. And I can definitely say from experience that, yeah, I feel like I felt all of those things. I felt ashamed. I felt like, well, no one's going to be interested in hearing this story. And so, again, I think it's amazing. There is parallel justice. And so today, if somebody, like in our show, we really say, if you do have a problem, call this number. And what happens when somebody calls? Who do they speak with?
Well, they would speak with a parallel justice specialist. And Abby Jaffe, who was on the show, was actually our original parallel justice specialist. And she's moved on and has started her own business. And so now, if they called that number that you're going to put on the end of the show, they would actually talk to a person named Rain. And Rain's first job would be to ask them about what they need and how they're doing, and just kind of generally checking in with them. And then depending on what the crime has been, then we figure out ways that we can help the person. But first and foremost, it's based on what the person needs. So unfortunately, a lot of people in Burlington who've been calling our program have experienced car vandalism of some sort, whether it's slashed tires or smashed windshields. And so one way that we might help is to help the victim make their car drivable again and cover the costs, or to a certain extent we can cover costs. Sometimes we can't cover the costs because they're too great, but many folks who have insurance, we will actually reimburse their insurance deductible.
Wow.
So that's kind of one way that we help. And we also have another parallel justice specialist who works at the police department, and his name is Clark, and what he does is he actually calls people who have reported a crime. And so he calls them and he says, hey, I just saw that you experienced a break-in at your house. My name is Clark. I work for Parallel Justice, and I'm just calling to let you know that we're here to support you, and if you'd like any help, just give me a call back. And so that's actually how we've gotten most of our cases, is through calling people back through the police department, incident reports.
Wow, that's amazing.
So since the beginning of the program, we've called over 2,000 victims of crime, and of those, probably about 400 have actually received services and monetary assistance and/or resource help from businesses in the community.
And the program's been in existence for almost 3 years?
That's right.
Okay. And can you talk just briefly on how it ended up in how the Parallel Justice Program ended up in Burlington?
Well, this predates my involvement with the program just a little bit, but according to our historical records, the Burlington Community Justice Center and the Burlington Police Department and the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, and I'm just for the listeners who may not know what that is, that's the statewide agency where that handles all the federal money that comes in to support victim services throughout the state. So this is a collaboration between those three organizations. And this woman named Susan Herman, who is the visionary of Parallel Justice, and she used to be the director of the National Office for Victims of Crime. She actually approached Vermont to see whether or not she might be able to pilot her idea here. And she actually piloted her idea in 2 other communities as well. And so individuals from these 3 communities, including ours, all were meeting and designing programs probably over about 2 years. And then we were able to launch it here in Burlington, partly because Senator Leahy was able to secure us some startup money from the Department of Justice.
Okay. I know we're just about to end, but I have one last question. Oh, what is your hope for Parallel Justice in Vermont?
Well, in Vermont, my hope is that Parallel Justice will not just be a Burlington program, but that we'll be able to replicate this in other communities where victims can receive assistance and support from their own community members and not be isolated in the wake of crime.
Well, that's a wonderful wish, and I hope it will persevere.
Yes. Well, thank you,
Yes.
Emily.
And thank you so much, Karen, for being part of this show.
Great.
Thank you.